Okay, welcome to our event on how to get started with artificial intelligence. This is a event that we've been doing in person and had great success helping companies to get going with their AI journey. And now we're doing it virtual. So we're glad that all of you are here. We are super excited to walk through some of these topics today. We're going to show you in a very practical way how you make a difference with AI within your organization. And we'll start by introducing ourselves. So my name is Nathan Lesnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. And I've been spending the last 7 years working with companies on their AI journey. And in particular, that has accelerated with rocket boosters over the last 6 to 7 months as virtually every company is having to think about the context of their mission through the lens of AI and understand how it can be real within their organization to drive revenue or operational savings. So we're going to help you understand how you do that and how it affects different parts of your business. And I'll love to pass it over to Brandon, who's going to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Nathan. Hello, everybody, and happy Wednesday. My name is Brandon Day. I'm Concurrency's lead data scientist. I'm responsible for leading the team that builds the machine learning systems that we're going to talk about. I've been doing applied math for about 10 years, and I love it. It's very exciting, especially as Nathan pointed out in the last year or so with the arrival of consumer-facing products that are using some of these really powerful LLMs. So great to meet everybody and excited to dig in today.
Awesome. And one other thing I would posit as like a little note here is as you have questions, we would love for you to use the Teams chat. So we found a lot of success with people just as we're going along, asking your necessary questions as they happen. We have both Brandon and I on the call, and we'll be answering those either through voice or through the chat as we go. So lots of great things happening, and we want you to be engaged. So let's start by talking about how companies get started with AI. So the first thing I want everyone on this call to understand, and if you were to leave this call and really only remember one slide, I want you to remember this one, because everyone is somewhere on this journey, and you may even be in multiple places in this journey simultaneously. What we find with organizations as they're adopting AI is they're somewhere on the path of leveraging that within their organization. The first start on that path, the sort of stopping point is, are my executives aligned? Is the business aligned on how I take advantage of AI as a pattern going forward? And oftentimes we find companies move really quickly down the path to the engineering level, and they start testing and playing with it and leveraging it. And they haven't done the homework to think about how this can be part of the mission of my business. And what happens when you don't take that first step of thinking about in the context of the mission of the business is you either don't get the funding that you need, or you pick the wrong use case, or you get down the road without achieving real governance or control. And the outcomes that you receive as a result are not as significant as what you could be getting as a result of being aligned as an organization. So now is the time where executives in the business, not just tech executives, but the CEO, the CFO, the VP of sales, the VP of customer service, they know that AI is going to change the way that they execute on the mission of their business. And now is the time for your executives to be aligned on this picture. So about 2 or 3 times a week, we're running executive sessions to help the leadership teams of businesses understand how AI is fitting into their forward journey. And we respect that any company should be doing the same thing. So that means understanding your business mission, understanding the relationship between those capabilities and incremental and disruptive innovation, the guardrails, and how your mission is then transformed as a result of AI. After you have done that, you then earn the right to do true envisioning. And that's art of the possible. It's then moving from art of the possible into what are my best use cases? How do I prioritize my resources? How do I create an AI factory within my business that results in driving value? How am I enabling readiness? So is my data ready for these use cases? Is my environment ready for things like Copilot? And how do I get myself in a position where I know that when I go down the next steps that I'm going to be successful at doing so? Those group envisioning sessions can be a great way to be able to get alignment across the business, not just within IT, but across the business and tracking forward as an organization. We've seen that as a really successful way for organizations to widen the tent of who's involved in the picture. So then we get to number 3, and that is where you are evaluating scenarios. And that can be a one-time thing to get going, or it can be a recurring thing, a sort of ROI factory of creating and engaging in scenarios within the business. And they've really fallen into two categories. The first is mission driven. This is this idea of things that directly enable the execution of my mission of my business and drive ROI in the form of new revenue or operational savings. So supply chain optimization, quoting optimization, customer service optimization, or just naming a few that will create real impact within the context of the business if they get the funding, sponsorship, and data they need to be able to execute on the need. So that mission-driven scenario is like sort of one lane. The other lane is, what am I doing to lift up every employee within my organization to be more as a result of AI? Think about that as like the difference between having email or writing a letter, right? Like we know there's an impact, a positive impact, and sometimes a negative impact of having email. And to operate my business with handwritten letters would take a long time. So we know there's an impact of having email. There's an impact of having AI in the same capability, right? As all of my employees within my organization are impacted as a result of having AI, how do I enable them to be more successful as AI becomes a commodity in the way they do their everyday jobs? And if I don't think about that part of the picture, the sort of like co-pilot part of the picture, I'm missing the just general productivity increase that comes as a result of AI being part of the way I do my work. So forwarding that, continuing down the line, you're seeing people then pilot, moving toward pilots that pay off into production iteration, which is what Brandon's going to talk more about. Like, what does that cycle look like? How do I be successful through that? And then at this last piece, you see this idea of scaled patterns, and scaled patterns being this picture of how do I do this at scale, architecturally, through security, through governance? What does 100 AI projects look like in my business? And how does that execute in a way that doesn't have duplicate, like isn't duplicative, isn't enabling, building the same thing over and over within my organization? So I want each of you to think about, where am I now and how do I get to a position where I've gone through each of the necessary steps to be successful? And if I have gone too far down the road, how do I back up to make sure I do the step so when I get down the line, I'm not having to repeat it later? All right, cool. So let's talk a little bit about the executive alignment step. What are things that we need to do at that spot? First thing we need to do is, what does the business's mission look like through the lens of AI? So when I think about the mission of my business, it does something in the world. That something it does in the world is enabled by the rest of the team members in my organization. Maybe I produce boats, or maybe I do insurance services, or maybe I have healthcare product that sells. How does that mission execute? And when it's enabled as a result of artificial intelligence, and how does that change the context of how I execute on everyone's job to be able to do more? So that drives in this idea of, what is the organizational stance on AI? How am I using AI to execute on my mission? What does the mission look? What does the business look like in 3 years? So, for example, I'm working with a company that does distribution of food. Well, right now, the distribution of food is their primary business, and a big business at that. But what if the business also was leveraging the data that we had to provide advice to organizations that are restaurants or convenience on how they can be better businesses? And that becomes a value stream for the organization. And they become more than just a food distribution organization. They become an organization that's based on delivering real value on the sustainability of the customers that they work with, making their restaurants more successful as a result of AI. You have to think about your business in that context. How do I pivot toward a future that may be different than what I do today, but more value than what I do today? Also think about this in the context of positioning the business in the relationship to people. The way I like to think about this is that the Industrial Revolution produced something in the world. It changed the way we produce. It turns people from craftsmen into, I'm doing a job over and over. I'm putting a square peg into a square hole. Now, what AI has the capability to do is to take the results of the Industrial Revolution, which is ultimately like producing more, but sometimes people being like put into positions where they don't have a lot of joy in their job. They're not leveraging their human capabilities as much as they could in their job. AI has the potential of enabling us to be able to undo some of those negative effects and facilitate humans doing creative work in conjunction with AI to enable what's special about us in the context of AI. Think about that in the context of your business's mission. If AI becomes a significant part of my business, how do I transform my people to be effective in that context? And that's a big part of where the executives need to be thinking. And then the last is understanding common blockers, which we're going to talk about right now. So what are the common blockers? What are things that you need to be aware of that you need to clear as an organization if you intend to be successful in AI? Well, the first is this kind of general fear, uncertainty, and doubt regarding data privacy and data sovereignty. This idea that like my data is my data. What you should remember is that any of the solutions that we're talking about here are built on the idea of private instances. This idea that like the AI model exists in the context of your tenant, in the context of your Azure environment or your cloud environment that you own, that's not used to train anyone else's things. If you're using a lot of public stuff to do this, that might be problematic because you might be having some of those data privacy impacts. In this context, make sure that you're using private instances with your own control over your own data to be able to achieve the outcomes that we're talking about in this presentation. Second item is data readiness. A lot of companies like to talk about like data readiness as a monolith. Like I was talking with a company yesterday, like, well, before we get to do any AI work, we're going to spend 2 years building our data estate. And then Cinderella, you can go to the ball. Like, no, like think about this in the context of use cases and readiness for the use case. Now, yes, sometimes use cases take a long time to get to data readiness, like use cases that require a organizational schema to be able to do something comprehensive. That's your moonshot. But a lot of other ones don't. They require a very thin vertical slice of capabilities being ready to be able to achieve an outcome. So data readiness is an important starting point. The third is this impact of human displacement. We just talked about that in the previous slide. That's really about how do I not only enable my humans to be more as a context of AI, how do I use AI as a force multiplier for people, but also how do I take AI just truly from a human-centric approach? Training, engagement, maximizing each individual human's strengths, enabling them to be more, the best version of themselves as a result of AI being part of our company. Some companies are going to do that. Other companies aren't. And the sort of judgment on us as a society is going to be whether we do that well. The fourth area is quality and hallucination. One of the biggest concerns that companies have is, what if I take this chatbot that's going to answer all the customer service questions, I put it in front of a customer, and answers the question wrong? What do I do then? How do I make sure that it's answering that question successfully? Now, we don't think about that always in terms of whether the human's answering it successfully, but we still really aren't concerned about it in the context of AI because it has even this extra propensity to like make something up or like answer it in a strange way. So there's a whole lot of techniques that we can use to be able to mitigate those concerns, and a lot of science that's starting to emerge in terms of how to do that well. And ultimately, it's about, can I put guardrails around the way it answers questions or addresses a concern or predicts something to be able to maximize my confidence in the answer it's giving back to my customer? And then the last item is bias. And bias is really about the data that fits into how I execute on this workload. Like, am I leveraging data that doesn't have unintended consequences? And if it does have those unintended consequences, how do I mitigate for those via a variety of means? And this is something we need to be thinking about all the time. Is my model answering questions or addressing concerns that are in alignment with the mission of my organization in the way that I want the mission of my organization to execute in the world? It goes back to the why question. Is the way I'm building this aligning to my why question of my organization? All right. So when we talk about this idea of broadening the tent happens in two ways. One, it happens by your executive team being aligned and asking itself those questions. The second way it gets broadened is by running broader envisioning sessions to enable people that are impacted by AI to be part of the solution. And this is by running like brainstorming sessions or engagement sessions where they're like they're positing the ideas, they're thinking about the opportunities for improvement, they're thinking about the areas that their business could be impacted as part of the solution rather than just being impacted. Starting with art of the possible, going into the why and the what, ranking ideas, voting, and that leads to what you'll see on this next slide, which is this value stream. This is an example of an agenda for a session like that, which is like art of the possible, but then here's the value analysis, right? So ultimately you want to get to something like this, which is here's a list of ideas, here's the value category, this is the difficulty, this is the description, these are the ones that make sense. And then what we often do after this is we plug this into an ROI calculator to help with producing what is the actual ROI of this thing. Because what you want to produce is an ROI machine. If I do my first project and it produces value, you will get more funding. If you don't produce value, it will not get more funding. So you need to produce value. It's part of the cycle. So if we are really prescriptive up front about going after solutions that have value, ones that will like drive outcome within the organization and prove that it's really something that will work, we're then going to be able to achieve more value continuing on the projects. So value analysis goal is to like whittle this down to things that make sense, select the ones that are going to drive impact, and then go after that impact within the organization. All right. And then ultimately what you're evaluating there is, do I have data? Is there ROI? And do I have sponsorship? And if I'm missing one of those three things, I'm going to fail. Like I may have ROI and data, but I don't have sponsorship. And I'm going to struggle to get the impact because it won't get rolled out. Or I may have sponsorship and I may have ROI, but I don't have the data and I can't achieve the outcome because maybe like I'm trying to do a supply chain project, but I don't have the historical data that feeds into that supply chain project. So I can't do the accurate predictions because there aren't the necessary data to do it, even though it's a great idea. So we need all three of those elements in order to actually create the outcomes that you're trying to seek. All right, I think here I hand off to Brandon. Go for it, man.
That's right. That's right. Thanks, Nathan. Hello to those of you who I haven't met. I'm Brandon, Concurrency's lead data scientist. I'm going to double click on a lot of what Nathan just said. So you want to do AI, don't really know where to get started. You have a lot of what seems like opportunity, but what could be done realistically? Can it be done feasibly? And should it be done, considering the things that Nathan just talked about? Obviously, at the center of all those questions is the ROI, right? And there are sort of broadly three different flavors of ROI. There's the measurable stuff, right? Those are the things that you can quantify. There's strategic ROI, which is really how the project helps activate the business strategy. And then there's capability related ROI, which is really how a project develops your in-house ability to implement ML, right? This is true for companies that are very new to AI, all the way up to companies that are very advanced with their capabilities, right? They're always on some frontier of capability, and subsequent projects push that frontier forward. So ROI is super important. How do you find projects that maximize ROI? It all starts with asking good questions. And as a little anecdote, a couple years ago, I was approached by a chief product officer at a software company that builds software in the commercial real estate industry. They build software to help manage like commercial real estate properties. And he came to me and he said, you know, we have these people who go out into the field and they take pictures of the properties, and these are the teams that sort of set up those cameras inside commercial real estate buildings so you can do like virtual tours online and so on. And he said, you know, those teams, everybody sort of works at a different pace, and we don't really know why. Can you help us understand why certain people work at different paces for the same job, all else equal? And I said, of course, you have the data on it. We can definitely investigate that. And before I got started, I asked, are you interested in predicting those rates, how long it takes people to do the job? And he said, no, we just want to know why they take different times. I said, okay. So did a bunch of work to investigate that question, made a bunch of complicated charts, gave it back to him. And he said, oh, this is really helpful. Thank you. I understand our business a little bit better. How well does it predict job durations? Right. And sort of, well, you said from the beginning that this wasn't really of interest to you, but that, anyways, I point that out because it's a different question. They seem very similar, but they're actually different. The understanding why question has like less ROI than the answering can we predict how long the job will take question. But it's important to start with the right question. Now, Nathan pointed out earlier that we have an ROI calculator, and we basically estimate the ROI of an AI project by simulating the business conditions and how effective the AI system can be, right? So in order to arrive at a good ROI, you basically need somebody who can predict the future, both in terms of how the business is going to do and how good the system is going to be. Obviously, we don't have any such oracle, so we have to be smart about how we arrive at that number, and we can do that through simulation. So what's being shown here is an example of an ROI calculator for one of our clients. Basically, these are the things that we're simulating, right? We've got, this was a automatic quote generator system. So we have things like quotes per month and orders per month, their margin, minutes per quote, and order value. All that's important. These are the actual values that are being simulated based on the mean and standard deviation that we get from their business. Now, all of those things affect metrics that inform the ROI, right? Like win rate, the quotes per person, revenue, etc. And all of those metrics affect the actual things that drive the ROI, right? Which in this case are two things: margin compliance, basically making more margin, and improving the win rate, right? The other thing that affects ROI is how effective the AI system is. And of course, we don't know this, but we can take reasonable guesses as to how effective it will be by saying it's 0% effective or 1%, 2%, etc. And we do that all the way up to some maximum value based on our experience in building these things. Obviously, we don't expect every system to, be as 100% effective, right? There are caps just given limitations to the data. All that arrives at a dollar number, which you add up to get the ROI. Of course, this is a simulation, so the numbers change a bunch. We're simulating this thousands of times, and they're basically taking the average, which represents our best guess. But of course, because it's a simulation, we have that best guess, but we also have an upper and a lower bound. This is all a part of simulating ROI so that we prioritize the right stuff, right? So we only want to do projects that add value, and we want folks to know how much value, right? It's important in terms of sequencing the right projects. Plus, it's more realistic. And very importantly, it keeps the AI solution aligned to business value. I've seen and been a part of a lot of projects that sort of go sideways because we sort of lost sight of what actually was valuable to the business and what was just like a cool technical thing to play around with. Now, in terms of actually finding the projects, Nathan mentioned a couple of the sort of criteria we look for before, and here are a few more. First of all, it really needs to be, it's preferred if it's benchmarkable, right? Do we have something that already exists but is suboptimal and can be improved in some way? Or is a human already doing it and we have their performance? The second criteria is it's got to be dateable, right? Or it has to have data. Ideally, the data source is trusted, it's clean, and it's big. Big in this context just means there's enough of it, and that changes depending on the use case. The third criteria that makes a good AI use case is it's adoptable, right? That is the adoption conditions are good, right? Basically, this is the combination of people have sort of low expectations for accuracy for whatever reason. The evaluation window, or that period after the system is deployed where we're figuring out if it's good or not, is sufficiently short, hopefully under a month. And ideally, it's undisruptive to people, process, and tech. These criteria change depending on how mature you are, but this is a really good starting point to make sure that you're heading off any challenges that are almost certain to crop up. And then the last thing that we look for in projects, they're feasible, right? Let's not do moonshot projects to start with. If we're just sort of wetting our whistle with projects, let's do something that's tried and true versus trying to build like a self-driving car or something. Now, if a solution doesn't exist, you can basically look for all the same things. It's just adding a little extra complexity. All right, so that was a lot of words. We have our potential use cases. We've calculated the ROI. We've ranked them according to that ROI, and we have chosen one to pilot, right? So let's pilot it. An example of a pilot we did for Generac was basically a way to help their customer service folks respond faster to users asking questions and increase how happy customers were with the experience. We did this by building a private secured instance of Azure OpenAI and made it a chatbot, right? And pointed it at their documentation. They loved it. This was a pilot and solved the problem that they had. Now, to kind of double click on the technical chatbot, there are a few important components that we're probably all familiar with in a chatbot. The first is obviously you have a user query, right? In this example, this is like, a customer says that his ATS does not have a neutral. He was told there's a kit for this, question mark. Is this something we can assist with, right? That's the question. The next component obviously is the response from the system, and it's basically providing its answer to the query. The third important part in terms of trust and safety is a citation, which is number 3. Where did the AI find its answer? And then lastly, was this helpful to the user? Thumbs up or thumbs down, right? Very basic things. ChatGPT has this, and they're getting more sophisticated every day as the tooling evolves. Now, this project required what's called multimodal learning. This is essentially both understanding text and images. You can't just sort of throw all of the text and images into a LLM and it automatically understands. That's of course changing, but at the time of this project, they needed to be parsed separately. So on the left, you have an example from a different project, but it's very similar to the Generac one, where you have install instructions for some window, right? And that's what we see on the left, but what the OCR system sees is on the right, right? It's basically the same thing, but devoid of any color and image and icon, any of the lines. All of the things that make the document meaningful to us are gone, right? So we have to figure out some way to kind of combine both of these. All right, so we did a quick pilot, and we've established that the estimated ROI is actual ROI. Now we're ready to iterate in production, right? So there are a couple components to this. We really want to phase the production build to de-risk the project as we move further and further into production and along the maturity spectrum. And we're going to do that by effectively quantifying how production ready the system is. And we'll do this sort of brick by brick. It's very fun to think of Legos. All right, so when you say AI or machine learning system, I think sometimes people tend to think of this, right? That's a machine learning code. That's excellent. The reality is a little more complicated. Naturally, the machine learning code is actually a otherwise small part of a much broader machine learning system, right? So there's serving infrastructure without which the model results cannot be served to the business, whether that's in a UI or an endpoint or so on. There's the feature engineering, without which obviously the model can't actually learn anything. There's the monitoring, without which the sort of maintainers of the system will have lots of headaches as they try to debug things as they go wrong, and so on. There's a lot that goes into these systems, and the machine learning is often a tiny component. So if it sounds like a lot, it is, and it can be. That's why we recommend, and we always build our projects in different phases, where we're building some of those components in one phase, and then in the next phase, we add more components to build and so on, right? So in the first phase, we're really doing a POC. The whole point of this is to figure out if business value can be extracted from the data, right? So you're basically doing the machine learning development, of course. You're collecting the data for it, doing your feature engineering, and then importantly, validating the model, right? Kicking the tires on it, making sure that it is as accurate as you need it to be, and so on. But then that's it, right? Let's stop there. That's the POC. We've confirmed it. We've validated the model. Don't invest anymore until we kind of cross that bridge. Once you cross the bridge, though, and you establish that that ROI exists, let's move into phase 2, which is the MVP. And we're basically going to take that POC and we're going to add a couple of more components, right? So we're adding configuration to help with kind of orchestrating things. We're adding data verification to make sure that the system is reliable. We're adding testing and debugging scripts to increase the reliability. And then very critically, we're adding serving infrastructure, which is really what allows us to flip the switch and expose the model results to the business. All right, so the whole point of MVP is to expose the model value to the business so that they can enjoy it. Once that's done, we're going to move into phase 3, where we're essentially automating as much of the system as possible so that it's maintainable and it's reliable and it's a strong piece of software, right? So we're taking that MVP and we're building things like the monitoring, and we're doing as much automation as we can, process management, metadata management, and so on. There's a lot that goes into this phase, and we could talk probably for the next 4 hours about this, but in the interest of time, we'll move on. All right, so this is essentially the same information, but presented in a table. I'm not going to drain all of this slide, but this is a sort of double click into what each of those components are, why it matters, and then when it's built. And then elaborating even more, these are the components broken down. So for the POC, you're building data collection scripts, feature engineering, machine learning development, and model validation. I provided examples here to kind of put boots on the ground for people. And I'm not going to drain all of this, but you'll have access to the slides after the talk today. I think this helps just sort of put boots on the ground for people, right? Where we're taking something kind of abstract and actually sharing what this looks like in terms of implementation. Same for the MVP components and the same for the MLOps components. Okay, so the next thing you'll want to do, like wherever you're at in that phase, is you want to quantify how mature the system is by component, right? And so by component, I mean, there are really four things. You've got the data, the infrastructure, monitoring, and the model. Now, each of those 4 components should be tested across 7 different dimensions. And this slide is moving kind of fast, but you have what you're testing in the assertion column for the component on the left-hand side. The quantification you're doing is basically giving each assertion a score that's either 0, 0.5, or 1. This is basically a measure of if it's automated, if it's being tested manually, or it's sort of just wishful thinking, right? And then on the right-hand side, I basically have what happens if you don't do this, right? Overall, this allows us to be objective about where to invest our dev time across the 4 components and what exactly we're doing, right? When we say we're trying to make the infrastructure more reliable, well, what are we doing, right? Well, it's very clear we have to make the training reproducible and so on, right? This helps with that. At the end of all of this scoring, you get a total score, right? It's between 0 and 7. This has different interpretations where basically if you're in a POC phase, your total system score is either 0 or 1, right? This is basically, it's kind of more of a research project than it is a productionized system. Once you move into the MVP phase, hopefully your maturity goes up. In fact, it should. That is sort of the definition of moving to the next phase. That's either a 2 or a 3. Effectively, it's sort of what you'd expect, right? It's basic first pass at productionalization has been made, but it's not fully done, right? You got to do some more stuff. Once you move out of the MVP phase and you're in the MLOps phase, you have a system that is a 5, 6, or a 7. This is effectively strong levels of automated testing or exceptional levels of automated testing. Now, there are obviously gaps in each of the components as you build it, right? When you're in the POC phase and you've got something that's more of a research project, you've got a gap between where you are now and where you need to be in order to get to the next phase, the MVP phase. And this is just sort of showing the effort required to get to that next step, depending on where you're at. Now, Nathan pointed out earlier, one of the most common legitimate concerns about AI is its human displacement, right? What are the risks involved when it comes to AI potentially replacing people? This is a framework that I adopted from a recent paper that effectively grades the level of autonomy a system has, right? It's loosely based off of the grading system that the Department of Transportation, uses to grade how autonomous self-driving vehicles are. On the least autonomous end, you basically have a thing that's not using AI, right? This is basic software. On the far right, you have the most autonomous it can be, and then in between you have different flavors. So at that first flavor, you basically have AI as a tool where the human is responsible for the tasks, but uses AI to automate simple subtasks, right? So think of like Outlook or Gmail, right? Something that's definitely using different degrees of AI in the back end, but and you can set up different automations, but isn't like writing emails for you. Then you move into AI as a consultant, which is the AI doing a little bit more, but only when you ask it to. Then you move into sort of level 3, which is AI as a collaborator, which is effectively, and these don't exist so much today. There are a number of examples where you have things like think of like a Grammarly where you're interacting with it more and it's like proposing things to you, even if you don't invoke it, right? This is you and the AI are collaborating together and it is identifying goals maybe that you didn't think of and helping you prioritize and so on. Then you move into the next phase where you have AI as an expert, right? This is AI is in control of the task and is now using the human for feedback and to execute simple subtasks, right? So think of OpenAI's like AlphaFold, right? The thing that is sort of predicting the shape of proteins that are useful in research. People don't do that. It's like inhuman how quickly and how insightfully that system is predicting protein shapes, right? That is an AI as an expert. And then lastly, you move into autonomous AI where AI does everything, humans not involved, right? I point this out because at each of these phases, you can still grade the system using the framework that I put together, right? You still have, if you're building an autonomous AI, you're still gonna have a POC version of that. You're still gonna have an MVP and an MLOps version and so on, right? This translates across whatever level of maturity you're at. All right, now, there's a lot there. And let's say you're bought into this AI stuff. You recognize it's here to stay and you have like a gazillion use cases that you know you're going to implement, but you want to do it in a scalable way. So what do? Well, you could establish a data science center of excellence and adopt certain architectures that allow for that scale. And that's what I'm going to talk about right now. So data science center of excellence, this means a lot of different things to different people, but it's essentially just doing better work faster without any extra risk, right? And very broadly, there are sort of two components to a center of excellence, right? You want to enable certain things and enforce other things, right? The idea is to sort of make the good things that you're enabling very cheap and to make the things that you're enforcing much safer. So in terms of what you're enabling, you really want to enable curiosity-driven exploration, right? So I don't mean like open-ended research. Data science teams are employed by profit-seeking businesses, right? So we really ought to be trying to maximize profits, not just writing research papers. And this isn't that. This is allowing a data scientist to investigate things and develop and innovate without being sort of told from the top down what to go build. There's a balance here, but the center of excellence really should be making that curiosity-led exploration as cheap as possible. You also want to enable access to business subject matter experts, right? Data science, it hinges on domain understanding as much as it does technical machine learning understanding. So you need to have access to the business people. You also want to have access to the data, of course. Very, very important. I've worked in organizations where that was limited and it just sort of hamstrung innovation unnecessarily. You also want to enable access to compute within reason, and you want to enable failure. And by this, I don't mean tolerate failure. I mean, enable it, encourage it. Allow your people to, as they say, fail fast. This is really important because data science and AI development is incredibly iterative, and you need to iterate only after you fail at some point, right? So enable failure. Now, you don't want to sort of have your data science center of excellence be the Wild West. You need to enforce some things as well, right? You want to enforce budget, so your Kubernetes cluster doesn't like cost you $10,000 a month or something. You do want to enforce certain access to certain sensitive data sources, and you do want to enforce alignment to the executive team and other sort of steering committee members. All right, so hopefully, and there's a lot more we could talk about with this, but that's a sort of overview. Now, in terms of when you actually enable things and when you enforce things in the framework that I provided before, you're essentially enabling during the POC and MVP phase while largely enforcing stuff during the MLOps phase. There's a lot of nuance to this, and this isn't always true, but this is a sort of abstract generalization. Now, in terms of actual architectures, you want to be setting things up that are scalable, right? You want to be having your team sort of move objects and code between production or dev, test, and production in a responsible way. And you can do that with different MLOps architectures. What's shown on the screen here is a simple MLOps architecture for tabular data, where the workflow is sort of as you'd expect, right? So running horizontally across the screen are different lanes, and we're starting at the top. The ML engineer basically has some idea that they want to test, right? This is on the related to the enabling curiosity-led development side of things. Then they start their exploratory data analysis. They write some code, they train a model, they validate the model, all in an Azure machine learning secure workspace, right? That's your dev workspace. All right, all that produces some code base that gets pushed to a repo, whether in Azure DevOps or GitHub. Once it lands there, you can set up a trigger for unit tests that then kick off a training pipeline that verifies data, trains the model, validates again, right? This is in the continuous integration lane. Once the model is validated, you run some integration tests, push your model to a model registry. That can then get deployed. We're in the continuous deployment phase now down here. That model then can get pulled into your deployment pipeline where you're maybe kind of canary deploying, basically running one model, but for a subset of users so that you sort of mitigate collateral damage, right? If it doesn't do what you want it to do, it's only affecting a certain minority of folks. Maybe do some A/B testing, validate the model again, and then finally release. You're serving the model, whether it's an API or writing to a database or whatever. You now have a live model that is creating value. That's excellent. Now, of course, there's a continuous retraining phase where you can sort of set up triggers to automatically retrain the model based on certain things it sees in the data, or just to retrain on some schedule. This is a very generic but a adaptable MLOps flow that does scale nicely. Now, A part of the Data Science Center of Excellence is the culture. And I only have a few prescriptive thoughts on this because this is very personal to the company and its unique culture. But in general, you really want to let curiosity drive, right? This is letting your data scientists figure out what to work on. The more senior the data scientist, the more they're going to gravitate towards the things that add value, right? That just happens naturally. You really want to encourage learning by doing. We are currently in a climate of AI hype, and this means a lot of people talk about AI, but may not be doing or building AI. This is probably not true among data scientists, but you do want to encourage people to learn by doing, not just reading or not just sort of talking. And then you want to have a very high tolerance for ambiguity in your data science department, right? It's a part of the nature of the work, right? Things are quite ambiguous. You don't know up front what's going to work and what's not. And so really grooming the business folks to tolerate that ambiguity is really what I mean by this. And then this is probably the most contentious thing I have on this on the deck on this slide here, which is I don't recommend burying the data science group as a support team, right? Serving supply chain or marketing or revenue, et cetera. You want to make it responsible for its own business goals. And I'm recommending this because it makes sure that or it really helps ensure that your data science team stays aligned with business value, right? Very important. There are lots of caveats to this, and it's not always true, but that's a sort of overall recommendation. And then lastly, at the risk of repeating myself, encourage exploration, but not open-ended research. Even if you don't, people are going to do it anyways. So I recommend encouraging it. Closing thoughts on that. The companies that I've seen be most successful with AI, they're all in. They've decided to invest regardless of how any specific project turns out. They understand that some projects go well and some go poorly. You don't know that in advance, and so you really have to test into what's working and what's not, and then continue with the next use case. It's not going away. So on the whole, very important to invest in machine learning. But on the ground, as a developer or an engineer, I would try to avoid machine learning. And I don't mean to be like cute about this. What I mean is machine learning systems are complicated, right? Before you saw that slide with all of the squares on it with machine learning sort of in the center. It's a very complicated thing. They're not deterministic. They can be fussy and brittle at times if you don't take the care to build engineering best practices into it. So I think it's best to try to solve the problem in a simpler way rather than using machine learning. But on the whole, it is very useful and it is not going anywhere. I do recommend starting very small and very precisely. Don't bite off more than you can chew. And you might not know what that is, right? That's where we can help. And I do recommend solving a real problem. Again, not trying to be cute with this, but I've seen a lot of times projects start only because it was an opportunity to try a new technology out or try a new method out or what have you. But that, of course, departs from what the real problems are. And this is sneakier of a risk than you might think. Also, you're going to be defunded if you don't build momentum with quick wins. AI projects live or die by the ROI that they create. And so if you're not establishing that ROI as you build incrementally, funding is going to go away. Also, machine learning isn't a science experiment anymore. Some of it is, but most of it isn't. The field has matured to the point where it's really necessary product development. And we can all but assure certain levels of performance. I say all but because you actually can't, but given what we do to calculate ROI and estimate the realistic solution effect size, we can remove a lot of that sort of science experimentiness. Also, machine learning projects aren't objectives, but they are a means to completing that objective. And I say this because of the sort of climate of AI hype that we're in. Some people understandably just want to get started with ML because everybody else is doing it. That might make them lose sight of what the real problem is. All right, so with that, I'm gonna close with where we started. We are here to help at any stage of the journey you're on with machine learning and artificial intelligence. Whether you're trying to get executive alignment or you need help scaling some pattern out, we can help reach out at any point. And with that, I think I'm passing it back to Nathan, it looks like.
Yeah, I think this would be a great time for us to take any verbal questions that the team wants to that the attendees want to ask. We've got about 7-ish minutes until the top of the hour. So happy to just kind of pause here. If you want us to back up to any part of the journey or answer questions about any part of the deck here, we'd be happy to dig into those. And then also would look forward to 2 things I want you to remember before you disconnect. First thing is I really want you to make sure that you fill out the survey. That is really helpful for us to improve and use this going forward. So we make sure we pivot to where it would be helpful for you. Also helps us to understand how we can help you as an organization move forward. So please finish that before you leave. And then also we have a slide on the next slide, just to bring that up real quick, Brandon, which talks about some of our upcoming events. So if you're excited about the content we've been talking about today, we do have a reInvent productivity with Copilot and the top OpenAI production use cases coming up, which are going to be really build-ons for the things that we've been talking about here. The production use cases conversation is really going to be about the why and the what. Like, what are things other companies are doing that I can harness in my organization, that I can sort of repeat where other people are getting productivity and success. And the Copilot conversation is really about how do I leverage the commodity capabilities that Copilot brings to the table and what I need to do to be ready for that, to be able to successfully take advantage of it. And then, of course, next week, we have the best of Ignite. And so if you're like a tech person like me and Brandon, and you want to just know what are all the cool things that have been announced at Ignite, and you want to get it in one session without having to go and watch all the sessions in your spare time, we'll take an hour and we're going to burn through them, and you're going to get all the best things that were talked about at Ignite, and you can take advantage of that in terms of knowledge for your organization. So don't miss that one. That's actually one of my favorite events to do all year long, is to go and do a best of Ignite session, because it's like drinking from a fire hose, and I'm sure you'll get value. All right, so we've still got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to leave it here for you guys to ask some questions. So first question gets answered either in the chat or verbally. Go for it. Okay, we've got one here. Can you comment on what Generac used as the basis for the ROI in the chatbot example?
Yeah, so
go for it.
Oh yeah, Nathan, feel free to kind of fill in wherever I miss something. So in general, these chatbot use cases are evaluated on the basis of how much time they save people, right? So if you're building a chatbot for your customer service team, the goal is typically help them find information related to customer inquiries faster or better, right? The faster is really what you can quantify, doing some very like loose time and motion or like quasi time and motion studies, right? Just getting estimates of how long people typically take to answer typical questions. And then it can kind of get more nuance from there, but typically it's time savings. Nathan, do you have anything extra to add to that?
Yeah, and I think that's an incremental thing. Oftentimes you are starting with enabling time savings of the direct customer service agent, for example, that they can handle more calls successfully in the context of the day, that my customer is on hold less minutes during the context of the day as a starting point. Eventually that can pivot to how can my customer ask the same question of a chatbot on their own and not have to go to the customer service agent. So then how many people can I serve concurrently without having to hire more staff and be able to, drive that cost down to be able to operate. So that's sort of where Generac goes, right? Like, is how many questions can I answer successfully in a given hour? And then how can I pivot that to a point where my customers are able to ask it without going to customer service at all?
Yeah, and then as you were talking, Nathan, I thought of too how they're not just evaluating or quantifying the incremental ROI with here's how much time you save and then what you just mentioned, but they're also um, assessing how much that project helps them do similar projects in-house, right? Now they have a template. Now they understand how this stuff works and what they need to do to build more of those chatbots, which is a hard to quantify ROI, but still a part of why they wanted to do the project.
Yeah, truly. Next question is, any upcoming events where you elaborate on data security concerns? That is a great question. We need to do an event directly on guardrails and ML ops in the context of data security. The OpenAI production use cases doesn't. It's really more focused on like what are opportunities for us to drive revenue. But let's see if we can answer any more of the questions now. Any other things that you would posit, Brandon, on like how companies put guardrails around data security, particularly in the context of like, let's say data security or even data quality, in that same context?
Yeah, so super important topic, and really ought to be top of mind for everybody, and I'm sure is for CSOs and so on. So in general, data security is prioritized in these LLM projects by way of the private instance of the model, right? So it is a secure private instance, which does not share data with Microsoft or OpenAI in the sense that they are going to train on it. They're not going to use any of the input or output for training purposes, so there's no risk of sort of data being breached. For example, like your data being used as answers to another company's questions, right? That's not going to happen. It's all private. And then quality is super important, right? Garbage in, garbage out. There are actually, before we get to quality, another thought on the security. There are sort of 3 different levels at which you can enforce data security in a LLM system. There's sort of role-based security, right, where that's sort of standard. You can enforce document level security, where let's say you have a chatbot that is general purpose for an organization. So it's training on HR policy documents and other SOPs, and maybe the finance team wants finance documents in there and the marketing team wants whatever. Well, you don't want everybody to have access to all that information, right? So you can limit who gets access to what documents. And then let's say even within documents, you want some people to access all the document while you want other people to only access certain parts of that document. You can also establish security at that sort of chunk level. Chunk is a component of a document. So you can establish security at pretty much sort of any of those levels, which does help in terms of governance. In terms of data quality, that's a huge topic. I don't know if I have much more to say other than like treat your data like a first-class citizen, right? And keep it of high quality. That's really important. There are lots of like little nuts and bolts things that are related to that, but I don't know if I'm prepared to answer them now. Great question, Steve. Thank you.
Awesome. We just hit the top of the hour, so we really appreciate everyone joining our event today. And you will have access to this presentation. We would request that in order to get that, you please fill out the survey. We look forward to hearing your perspective on the content we shared today and looking forward to seeing you on any of these upcoming events. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.